I remember the first time I heard about the shot. Not just any shot, but the shot. The one everyone whispered about during downtime in the barracks, like it was some kind of ghost story passed down through generations. There was no date, no confirmed witness, and certainly no proof. Just a number, 2,800 meters. A distance so absurdly long that even the most seasoned snipers in our unit would smirk and shake their heads. It's just a myth, they'd say, or only legends could shoot that far. At first, I thought they were exaggerating, trying to scare the rookies, build up some mystique around what it meant to be elite. But the more I listened, the more I realized something strange. Everyone believed in it, not just as a fairy tale, but as a real, tangible moment that had supposedly happened somewhere, sometime, by someone whose name no one could quite remember. We all knew who repeated the story most often: Sergeant Mendez. Gruff, straight-backed and scarred by time and duty, Mendez wasn't the type to joke. His voice carried the weight of command, and his eyes, those sharp and distant things, told you he'd seen things no man should ever see. When he spoke about the shot, it wasn't with awe. It was with finality, like it was a gate only the dead or the divine could pass through. I'd only been with the unit for 6 weeks when I first heard him tell the story. It was during a break after drills, the kind where the sun is ruthless and silence is sacred. One of the guys, Hutchins I think, had been bragging about his long-range grouping. Nothing amazing, just solid work. That's when Mendez stepped in, real quiet, voice like gravel dragged across concrete. "You think that's far?" he said. "Only legends shoot at 2,800. Everyone else is just playing soldier." Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. No follow-up, no smirk, no wink. Just a sentence and silence. I should have let it go. Should have smiled along with the others and chalked it up to one more military myth meant to keep us chasing ghosts. But something about that number, 2,800, lodged itself in my brain like a bullet in bone. It haunted me. I couldn't sleep. I'd stare up at the ceiling in my bunk, recalculating wind drift, bullet drop, Coriolis effect, trying to figure out if the shot was even possible physics-wise, and more importantly, who had actually taken it. Why no name? Why no rank, no medal, no file? Every spare second I had, I spent researching. After hours in the armory, cleaning gear I'd already cleaned, I'd sneak off to the range, just me, my rifle, and the sound of wind. I pushed every limit, extended every reach. Most of the guys thought I was showing off. Some thought I was just nuts. But no one asked questions. That's the thing about obsession. It makes you invisible in plain sight. One night I cornered the unit's oldest armorer, an old Marine vet named Willis, who walked with a limp and smelled like engine grease. He was cleaning a scope when I brought it up. "Hey, Sarge, that 2,800 shot, you ever hear who made it?" He didn't even look up, just gave a soft chuckle and said, "If someone ever did, they didn't live long enough to brag about it." That answer messed with me. Why wouldn't someone want to be remembered for something like that? Was it classified, buried, or was it all just smoke and mirrors, a way to separate the dreamers from the doers? But I couldn't let it go. I think I started to believe that if I could prove the shot was real, maybe I'd understand something deeper about Mendez, about the system, hell, maybe about myself. I didn't come from much. No medals on the wall, no military lineage. Just a quiet kid with steady hands and a mind that refused to accept boundaries. Maybe that's what made me dangerous. The myth of the impossible shot wasn't just a record, it was a challenge, a dare wrapped in legend. Every story Mendez told was like flint to my fire. He didn't know it, but each word he dropped into that barracks air was fuel, and I wasn't going to stop until I either proved it true or rewrote it myself. I think Sergeant Mendez always knew what he was doing. The way he talked, the way he walked through the unit like the air bent around him, it wasn't about ego, it was control, authority, power disguised as silence. He didn't need to bark orders unless something was about to explode. Usually a glance was enough. You could be halfway across the base and feel that stare hit you like a sniper's dot on your chest. And that day, the one that set everything in motion, it started with just another drill. Hot morning, thick humidity, dust clinging to your skin. We were out at the range, rotating through the long-distance station. Nothing fancy, standard targets at staggered distances, and a wind that kept shifting just enough to throw you off. I had just finished a tight grouping at 200 meters. Not perfect, but better than most. As I stepped back from the firing line, I caught Mendez watching me. Not with pride, not with anger, but with that unreadable face he always wore, like he was trying to decide if I was worth investing his silence in. Then he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. "Everyone gather up," he said, loud enough to carry over the wind. We all circled him, rifles slung, sweat dripping, unsure if this was about to be a lecture, a reprimand, or maybe some impromptu lesson in humility. He scanned the group, let the silence stretch, then pointed at a target marker, one barely visible in the distance, so far you could mistake it for a smudge of shadow. "You see that?" he asked. "That's 2800, the record, the legend." A few of the guys exchanged glances. Some chuckled under their breath, like they already knew where this was going. "I've seen men hit 2000, he continued. "Maybe 2200 with perfect conditions and God holding the wind. But 2800, he paused again. "Only ghosts make that shot." He turned to me just for a second. "Not rookies, not dreamers." I stood still, eyes locked on that dot in the distance. He wasn't yelling, wasn't mocking, but the message was clear. That shot is not for you. It was more than a challenge. It was a wall. He was drawing a line in the dirt, one that separated men from myths and letting us all know which side we belonged on. That's how he operated. Never direct, always psychological. Plant the seed, let it grow. He didn't have to humiliate anyone. He just set the limits and waited to see who would test them. I felt the burn in my chest, not embarrassment, not even anger, just this slow, rising heat that told me I couldn't walk away from that moment the same way I entered it. And I could tell he knew it too, because that's what Mendez did best. He saw potential as a threat. After the briefing broke up, the others went back to joking around, pulling triggers and talking trash. But I stayed quiet. I couldn't stop staring at that impossible marker, so far out it barely shimmered. Later that night, while everyone else was watching a movie in the rec room, I found Mendez alone in the armory inspecting scopes. I don't know what I was thinking, walking in like that, but something in me needed to push back. "Sergeant," I said, "what if someone did hit that shot?" He didn't even look up, just twisted the turret on a Leupold scope and replied, "Then they're not in this unit." It was so clean, so absolute, like a door slamming shut in a dark hallway. But then he looked up just for a second and locked eyes with me. "And if you think you're the one," he said slowly, "you'd better be ready for what comes after." I wanted to ask what that meant, but he turned back to his scope and didn't speak again. I left without another word, but that final line, it stuck to my ribs. He wasn't warning me about failure, he was warning me about success. Because in our world, the moment you rise above the pack, you become a target. Not just for enemies, for doubt, for envy, for expectation. That's when I realized something vital. The shot itself wasn't the challenge. It was surviving what came after. I was never supposed to be here, not really. I didn't grow up dreaming of medals or missions. No one in my family wore a uniform. My dad fixed boilers for a living, and my mom cleaned houses. The closest I came to combat was watching war movies in a cramped apartment with the sound barely loud enough to hear. And yet, somewhere along the way, I developed this obsession with precision, with focus, with doing something that mattered. Maybe it was the quiet that drew me to long-range shooting. Maybe it was the discipline, or maybe I just wanted to prove to someone, maybe just myself, that I could be more than background noise. When I arrived at the unit, I was barely more than a shadow. The guys called me bookworm for the first month because I didn't talk much and always had a tattered field manual tucked under my arm. I wasn't trying to stand out. I was trying to learn. I watched the others, their posture, their routines, the way they cleaned their weapons like they were sacred. I listened more than I spoke, and when I did speak, it was only to ask questions that actually mattered. Not who had the best jokes or who had the hottest girl back home, but things like barrel harmonics, scope zero drift, high-angle ballistics, the kind of stuff that made most of them roll their eyes and walk away. That was fine by me. I wasn't here to be liked. I was here to be lethal. At night, I'd sneak into the observation tower, lie on the concrete with my notebook, and just listen to the wind. I studied the way it moved across the field, the way it changed direction depending on where you were standing. I started mapping wind patterns in my head, memorizing distances, bullet speeds, compensations. I had no instructor, no mentor, just instinct and obsession. By the third month, I had made myself invisible. No one saw me coming, but Mendez did. He never said much, but I caught his eyes on me more than once. I think he recognized something in me, not talent exactly, but drive. That dangerous kind of drive that doesn't respond to praise or punishment. The kind that either turns into something remarkable or something reckless. It was the week after the legend speech when things really shifted. Everyone was gearing up for a live fire qualification. Just standard range stuff, but with observers present from high command. There was always pressure on those days. Pressure to perform, pressure to not screw up. And pressure to impress the people who might write your future with a single nod. That morning, as we prepped gear, I felt something tighten in the air. A kind of hum, like electricity before a storm. I checked my rifle 3 times. Everything was perfect. Scope, barrel, trigger, balance. I had practiced this enough to know every inch of the weapon like it was an extension of my body. But even then, I felt something else stirring underneath the surface. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. When my turn came, I stepped up without hesitation. The other guys weren't paying much attention at first. They'd seen me shoot. I was solid, clean, predictable. But as soon as I asked the range officer for a distance extension past the final station, heads turned. Mendez was watching, arms crossed, jaw tight. The officer gave me a hard look. "You serious?" I nodded. "Yes, sir. I'd like to try for 2,800. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion I've ever heard. A few guys chuckled. 1 or 2 muttered something about arrogance, but Mendez didn't move, didn't blink. The officer hesitated, then radioed for approval. After what felt like an hour, he finally gave me a nod. "You get 1 shot. Make it count." I took my position, adjusted the scope, let my breathing slow. And then, for the first time in my life, the world narrowed down to a single point. I wasn't thinking about what came next. I wasn't thinking about the legend. I was thinking about wind speed, elevation, bullet coefficient, spin drift, humidity, mirage. I was thinking about the shot, and I was ready. They say time slows down in moments like these. I used to think that was just poetic nonsense, something Hollywood cooked up to make heroes look cool in the heat of chaos. But as I lay prone on that sun-baked platform, cheek pressed against the stock of my rifle, crosshairs dancing gently on the edge of the impossible, I finally understood what they meant. Time didn't just slow, it stopped. Everything faded. The voices, the tension, even the doubt. All that remained was the rifle, the wind, and me. The air was heavy that day, dry but not dead, the kind of heat that plays tricks on your eyes. Mirage shimmered over the sand like a ghostly curtain, and at 2,800 meters, that distortion could ruin you. I adjusted my scope, compensating for the optical illusion, for the wind shear I could feel brushing the back of my neck, for the subtle upward draft over the ridge that no textbook could predict. Behind me, I could hear boots shifting, people whispering. Mendez was silent, but I could feel his stare. It was like weight on my back. I knew what everyone was thinking. Who does this kid think he is? But I didn't care. This wasn't for them. This was for every night I stayed up calculating shot trajectory instead of sleeping. For every time I was overlooked, ignored, dismissed. For every person who assumed quiet meant weak, or that rookie meant incapable. This shot was for me. I inhaled deeply, slow, controlled. The air tasted like dust and cordite. My finger found the trigger, not touching it yet, just hovering like a heartbeat waiting for rhythm. I counted. 3 breaths, 2, One, half a breath in, hold, then I squeezed. The recoil was nothing, gentle, clean, familiar, but that shot, that one bullet, it might as well have been a meteor tearing through the atmosphere. I followed it in the scope as long as I could, nothing but the sound of my own pulse in my ears. The seconds dragged, and then in the distance the target flinched, a puff of dust, a shift of impact. Direct hit, center mass, silence. I didn't react, not at first. I just kept my eye on the scope, watching the target sway ever so slightly in the heat. Then I heard it, just one voice. No fucking way. Then another. What the hell? I sat up slowly, heart pounding, breath shaky now that it was over. I looked back, and all I saw were faces frozen in disbelief, some with mouths open, others with narrowed eyes, trying to process what had just happened. And then there was Mendez, still silent, still watching. But his expression had changed. It wasn't anger or shock. It was something closer to fear. He walked toward me. The others stepped aside like he was a storm rolling in. I stood, rifle still in hand, trying to read him, but failing. He stopped a few feet in front of me. "You got lucky," he said, voice quiet. I met his eyes. Maybe. He stared at me for a long time. Too long. Then he stepped past me, toward the observation post without another word. And just like that, it was over. No applause, no celebration, just a shot that changed everything. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Some of the guys tried to talk to me, ask how I did it, if I'd cheated, if I'd trained with some elite team before joining up. I gave short answers and walked away. I wasn't interested in bragging. I wasn't interested in proving anything anymore. Because I knew the truth. That shot had been earned. Every minute, every doubt, every silent hour in the tower with nothing but calculations and willpower. But I also knew something else. The hard part wasn't over. It had just begun. The silence that followed my shot lingered longer than the echo itself. It wasn't just the sound that vanished. It was the energy, the bravado, the rhythm of everything around us. It was like someone had pressed pause on the entire range. Even the wind, which had been my constant companion that morning, seemed to halt in place, as if it too was waiting to understand what had just happened. I stood there, holding the rifle the same way I had hundreds of times before, but now it felt different, heavier somehow. Not because of the weapon itself, but because of what it now represented. That one shot, the one everyone said was impossible, was no longer a story, a myth, or a warning passed down by veterans with gravel in their voices. It was real, and I had pulled the trigger. The walk back to the barracks was the longest I'd ever taken, even though it couldn't have been more than a couple 100 meters. The guys kept glancing at me, some in awe, some in confusion, and a few with that look you learn to recognize in military life, jealousy disguised as a grin. It didn't matter. I didn't say anything, and no one dared break the tension. But Mendez, he didn't look at me at all. He'd walked off without a word, like the whole thing hadn't happened, like he hadn't just seen the very limits of human precision get rewritten before his eyes. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it denial? Was he angry that a rookie had proven him wrong in front of everyone? Or was it something deeper, something personal? I thought the shot would earn me respect, but what it really earned was isolation. For the next few days, no one treated me the same. The guys were careful around me, too careful. Conversations stopped when I walked in. Jokes no longer landed. Some started calling me legend behind my back, but not with admiration. It was sarcasm. A wall between them and me, built with the very myth I had shattered. Even the officers took notice. I was called in for 2 separate briefings, one with our commanding officer, who smiled tightly and told me I had potential, and another with a pair of men in suits whose badges didn't match any branch insignia I'd ever seen. They asked how I trained, what equipment I used, if I'd ever worked with private contractors or intelligence units. I answered honestly, but their eyes never blinked. They weren't impressed. They were concerned. I started to realize what Mendez meant when he said, "You'd better be ready for what comes after." Because the truth is, no one wants the legend to be real. It's safer when the impossible stays impossible. It keeps the order intact. The system doesn't like outliers, not when they make the rules look fragile. And me? I had just broken their favorite rule. A week after the shot, Mendez finally spoke to me. We were alone in the mess hall, early morning, before most of the unit was awake. I was sitting with my coffee, notebook open, sketching out a new wind correction model. He walked in, poured himself a cup, then stood across the table from me, silent for a long moment. "You think you proved something out there?" he asked, voice low. I looked up at him. "I proved it's possible." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, you did." Then he leaned forward, eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "But now you've got a target on your back, bigger than you can see, and not just from the enemy." He walked away before I could reply. That conversation haunted me, not because of the threat, but because I knew it was true. From that day on, everything changed. My schedule was different. I was pulled from normal drills, sent to specialized training I hadn't requested, asked to sign non-disclosure agreements, given access to equipment most soldiers never even see outside of a movie. They were grooming me for something, or maybe testing me, but one thing was certain: the shot had made me more than just a soldier. It had made me a problem, and problems in this line of work don't always get solved with medals. Sometimes they just disappear. People think that becoming a legend is the end of the road. It's not. It's the beginning of a road you never asked to walk. After the shot, I expected a brief moment of recognition, maybe a promotion, maybe a quiet nod from Mendez, maybe just a sense of peace knowing I had done the impossible. What I got instead was silence, suspicion, and solitude. I became something between a weapon and a warning. The unit never said it out loud, but I could feel it every time I stepped onto the range or walked into the barracks. I was no longer one of them. I had become the one who made the shot, a ghost, a myth in the making. And that made people nervous. It wasn't just the rank and file, it was the system. One morning, about 10 days after the shot, I was pulled from formation. No explanation. Just a corporal handing me a folded slip and pointing to an idling black SUV by the gates. Inside were two men in plain clothes, one with a tablet, the other with eyes like cold steel. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't smile. They drove me 2 hours off base to a facility I didn't know existed. No signs, no flags, no insignia. Inside, everything was clean, sterile, humming with quiet tension. I was taken to a room with no windows, just a desk, a chair, and a folder. The man with the steel eyes slid it toward me. "Do you know what this is?" I opened it. Inside were photos, grainy, high-altitude images of landscapes I didn't recognize, coordinates, ballistics data, wind forecasts, names I'd never heard, crossed out in red ink. "It's a list," the man said, "of targets that need to be hit by someone who can do what no one else has." I looked up. "You want me to kill these people?" He didn't flinch. "We want you to serve your country at a level only legends can." That was the moment I realized I wasn't being congratulated. I was being claimed. After the shot, I'd become more than a soldier. I was a tool, an asset they didn't know what to do with yet. I was valuable but dangerous, revered but feared. And if I didn't comply, I could just as easily vanish into the silence from which I came. I didn't answer them that day. They let me go, back to base, back to the people who no longer knew how to speak to me. But I felt different, like a storm waiting to happen. Mendez cornered me the next evening. He didn't ask where I'd been. He already knew. "They made you an offer," he said, lighting a cigarette. "Didn't they?" I nodded. "You take it?" "No." He exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Smart, for now." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he had taken the shot once too. Maybe not literally, but metaphorically. He had stepped over some line long ago, proven himself in some impossible way, and the system had claimed him just the same. Only difference was, he'd learned how to survive it. That night, we didn't speak much more, but for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't before. Respect. Not because I'd made the shot, but because I'd understood the cost. They don't tell you that when you shatter a legend, you inherit its burden. You become the new myth, the one others whisper about in the dark, the name they speak when they want to believe the impossible is real. But being a legend is lonely. It isolates you, elevates you just high enough for everyone to want to pull you back down. I still train, still shoot, still perfect my craft, but I no longer chase records. I no longer try to prove anything, because I already did. Now, I wait. I wait for the next impossible thing to appear in my scope. And when it does, I'll make the shot again, not for glory, not for praise, but because sometimes the only way to stay human in a world that worships legends is to remember you were never trying to be one in the first place. If this story left you speechless, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you never miss the legends we uncover, one untold story at a time. Your support helps us bring you deeper, more powerful narratives every week. Drop a comment below. What would you do if the impossible stared you in the face? Let's talk about it.